Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're really glad that you're here today for another of our series of virtual admitted students events. Today's topic are careers, career development. Gee whiz, what do I do after I go to law school? And what do I do while I'm in law school? And we have with us two really amazing people who are on our staff. Rebecca Verona is the Assistant Dean and in charge of the Office of Career Development in Camden. And Elizabeth Acevedo is the Assistant Dean and in charge of our office in Newark. I am in the Newark campus, but the topics that we're going to cover today will cover both campuses. So if you're interested in Camden or Newark, you're going to hear about the differences between how the two offices operate. And then there will also be time for question and answer. As you see down below, there's a Q&A, there's also a chat. And my colleague from Camden, Nancy Rupert, who is the Assistant Dean for Admissions in the Camden office, will be monitoring the chat, adding websites of all different kinds of things that are on our website. And hopefully this will give you a really good idea about law school careers and what to expect while you're in law school. So we are recording this, as I mentioned, it'll be up on our website. We don't see you, so you only get to see us. So let's start first with Dean Verona. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you went to school, to law school, and what was your career path to getting to Rutgers Camden?
Thanks, Anita. So my name is Rebecca Verona. I'm the Assistant Dean for Career Development at the Law School in Camden, as Anita mentioned. So my career path. So I am a double Rutgers grad. I went to Rutgers undergrad in New Brunswick, and then subsequent to that, I worked at a law firm in Newark, actually, McCarter and English. I actually grew up in northern New Jersey, and then eventually made my way to South Jersey to attend law school at Rutgers Law School. At the time, it was Rutgers Law School Camden. You know, I enjoyed being a law student. And when I graduated, I did a judicial clerkship for a civil division judge in New Jersey. And subsequent to that, I practiced environmental litigation at the New Jersey Attorney General's office. And then at some point, there was an opening in the career services office. And, I'm someone who really never wanted to leave higher education. So I was like excited when I thought, oh, there's a way I can, spend the rest of my life in an educational environment. And so I applied for that position, and I started out as a career counselor in the office, and I'm now the assistant dean. I've been here for 18 years, and I have really enjoyed my time here, and I enjoy working with law students. And once the law schools merged in, I think 2016 we merged, we started working across campuses. I feel really fortunate to work with Dean Acevedo. We work pretty closely together, and that's something we'll hear a bit more about today, about the ways that our offices partner together to support law students on both campuses.
Great, thank you. Okay, Dean Acevedo, you're next. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Anita. So after graduating law school, attending law school in DC, I moved to New York and started my legal career with the district attorney's office in Bronx County. And I was there for 15 years in total before coming to Rutgers. I was first a line attorney as an assistant district attorney in the Domestic Violence and Sex Crimes Bureau. I became a supervisor about 5 or 6 years in, and then eventually became deputy chief of the Domestic Violence Bureau. And one of my main roles as deputy chief was supervising each year new cohorts of young attorneys, new grads, and supporting them and training them during those first few years of practice. And so when the time came to think about next steps and what I wanted to do professionally afterward, my family and I were deciding that New Jersey made sense for us to move out of the city, like so many with growing families. And I started to really think what made sense for a next step. And the work that I did that I really loved working with young attorneys, it seemed like a really logical kind of progression to think about working with law students. And when that opportunity became available, I, really eagerly embraced it and came here in 2012 as an assistant director. A few years later, became associate director. In 2019, when my predecessor retired, became acting assistant dean for the Newark office. And in 2020 was appointed by the dean to serve permanently in this role. And I've really enjoyed it. Just to connect to what Dean Verona just mentioned, we work very closely together. We actually almost were late this morning for this meeting because we were so engrossed in a conversation about planning for the upcoming weeks, the last 2 weeks of the semester. We communicate on a daily basis. We have a standing weekly meeting. I can't imagine, right, like being able to administer so many programs, such a big effort without a partner like Dean Verona. And so we have really had much success, managing things and administering things across 2 campuses. The only downside is we can't meet up for lunch because it's a little bit far maybe we'll meet in the middle now that things are opening up, but we really work quite seamlessly and very closely with one another.
Great, thank you. I think what you heard from both Dean Verona and Dean Acevedo is the kinds of twists and turns that your career can take. It used to be way back when you followed one path and you went to a firm, you became partner, and you stayed there for life. And that is really not the way the legal market is operating right now. So Dean Verona, could you tell us a little bit about what you think is going on? You're in the Philadelphia area. So could you talk about that just a little bit from your perspective?
Just like what's going on in the Philadelphia market, Anita?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so, so maybe it might be good to sort of like contrast the Philly market with the New York market a little bit. So the Philadelphia area market is a little bit different from the New York market. And this is something that, I think I always understood, but since the law schools merged, I've gained a deeper understanding of. And so when I say that they're different, what I mean is that the Philly area legal market is very interested in hiring students and graduates who are committed to practicing law in the Philadelphia area. And they look for some kind of demonstrated commitment to the area. And that could be you went to law school in the area, you did your summer internships in the area, and then ultimately that you plan to practice law in the area. And I think that from their perspective, what they're thinking is, so we are, as a firm or as a public interest agency or a government agency, going to invest in you as a law student over the summer, right, while you're doing your summer internship, because it does take considerable resources and time to train an intern or a new attorney, and that we don't want you to leave, right? We want that our investment to stay in the area upon graduation. And so what I have noticed is that the New York market is different, right? The New York market doesn't necessarily care so much about your commitment to the area, right? Like any legal employer that invests in you, they'd like you to stay, and they'd like to see that you are committed to practicing law in that area. But Philly, I think they go the extra mile, and it's something that I talk to all of my students about, right? When you're applying for jobs in the Philly or South Jersey market, that employers will often ask you about your ties to the local area. Or if you're not from the local area, if you plan to stay when you graduate. I hear less of that about the New York market. I do think it's more amplified in the Philly market, and it's just something to keep in mind, when you're applying for positions. We do have lots of students who come, well, maybe I shouldn't say lots. We have students who come from outside of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and they find jobs over the summer and after graduation in the Philly area, but it's something that they have to address often in interviews. And I like to make sure that it's not a surprise. And so one of the things that we do is, when we're counseling students and I'm looking at someone's resume and I'm seeing, oh, okay, they might not be from the area, we talk about how are we going to address this, right? When it comes up in an interview, how do we address the employer's underlying concern, which is, is this person going to stay in the area? So for me, that would be something significant that I think about when we're talking about the Philadelphia legal market. And Dean Acevedo, would you agree that New York is a little bit different in that respect?
Absolutely. It's funny, a lot of students will say, how do I convince a New York employer that I want to be in New York? And the answer really is you don't have to. A lot of New York employers, they're just like, of course you want to come to New York, doesn't everybody? And that's kind of the cultural attitude. So it's definitely a distinction. Even too, I would build from what Dean Verona said in the New Jersey market. The New Jersey employers are always kind of, wanting to tease out with a candidate, why are you interested in our firm? Why in Union County or Somerset County, right? Because they're always thinking, will this person leave very quickly for the New York market or for the Boston market? And so demonstrating that connection, that commitment, as Dean Verona said, is really important. Whereas the challenges, right, and the aims of what you want to accomplish in an interview with a New York employer may be different. And these are all things we work very closely with students in order for them to be well prepared for. I would say, just to answer your question, Dean Walton, about the landscape and what's happening with the market right now, it's really interesting. It's definitely, it's ever changing. There's tons of articles being written on the legal market right now, the impacts of COVID, what we're seeing as things open up. And it's been very interesting. I think no one's been able to predict it perfectly. A lot of surprises, but the good news is there are a lot of opportunities, especially for junior attorneys. Part of that had to do with now the last couple of years, us experiencing the impacts of COVID. Firms were a little bit careful about their hiring and now find themselves with too few of junior associates in their ranks. And so they're, very enthusiastic and eager to hire. So that hiring momentum, right, it impacts and trickles down to our students, to new graduates. So that's a good thing. It's been interesting to watch the impacts of COVID on certain practice areas, right? We've seen an explosion in restructuring and bankruptcy. We've seen an increase in capital markets work and, private equity, a lot of different areas, that we're seeing across the board, a lot more activity in. So we've been trying to tie a lot of our programming and information for students to those growing areas. So students are well-versed in those practice areas, are aware that these are pockets of the industry that are growing, so that they can choose courses accordingly, that they can answer questions appropriately in interviews. So it's a really interesting time. There's definitely part of the picture is some areas are contracting a little bit and slowing down a little bit. So it's interesting to watch, but we're definitely pleased to see that there's been a very active market in the last certainly 6 months, and even I would say year.
Okay, that's definitely great news. So I'm a 1L student, and what we were just talking about is kind of what are my opportunities after I graduate, but how do I get there? So as a 1L student coming into the law school in the fall, what happens? Like, how do I get into your office? What kinds of programs do you offer for 1Ls? What kinds of things can we do in the summer? And how do we get to that? So Dean Verona, why don't you answer that one first?
So your main priority as a 1L, particularly in the fall semester, is to adjust to law school, right? It's a whole new world. Law professors are looking for something different than undergraduate professors are looking for, and it does take some time to adjust and understand what these new demands are. So in recognition of that, we begin meeting with students, with 1L students, one-on-one in October, right? So we have our individual one-on counseling appointments beginning in October. But prior to that, we offer programming to teach you about the practice of law, essentially. So in your first semester and throughout law school, really, but in your first semester, your priorities are adjust to law school and learn about the practice of law. And so Dean Acevedo was mentioning, the programming that we create that is often tied to, emerging practice areas, but also, is tied to practice settings, teaching students about, what it's like to practice law at a government agency, what it's like to be a public defender or a prosecutor, so on and so forth. Because while you'll learn about, criminal law and torts and con law and so on and so forth in your classes, learning about the practice of law, learning what lawyers do is something that takes place often outside of the classroom, right? So a big part of what we do is we offer programming to help you understand what your options are. And really, a big part of this process for you is taking stock in terms of what you like, what you don't like, and then using that information when you come and meet with us one-on-one to start coming up with a summer job search plan. So, somewhere around October, you might come in and start meeting with us. Every student at Rutgers is assigned to an individual career counselor, and that's the person that you work with throughout your duration at Rutgers. And most law students, most first-year law students will begin actually applying for jobs at the very earliest in December. Quite often, you're not actually applying until the spring semester because many employers will want to see your fall semester grades. And that's another reason for, allowing students to adjust to law school and the demands of, your 1L schedule, so that you really can spend time focusing on, on your law school courses, so that when you are applying in the spring semester, you have those law school grades, and you put in your best effort in the fall. But that first summer, and I think this is really important, I want people to really appreciate this. It's really about getting your feet wet, right? It's really about just getting some experience in the practice of law, like learning, taking what you've learned during your first year and applying it in a practical setting. So it's probably not going to be similar to the job that you will do when you graduate from law school. So let's put it that way. It's an experience that will provide you with information about you in terms of what you like and what you don't like, and help you to make future decisions about your career.
Thank you. Many things that the students will do in the summer, we'll do internships with public interest organizations. They might clerk in the summer and earn credit for clerking. There's a whole process for doing that. If you're interested in learning about all of that, there was a virtual meeting and that's up on the website about public interest, pro bono, externship, and experiential learning. So I suggest you go back and look at that. Beth, do you have anything to add to that? And also there was a question in the Q&A about part-time students And what happens to part-time students? They're a little different type of student. So why don't you expound on that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So I would just kind of build off of what Dean Verona was saying in terms of that exploring kind of aspect of the 1L year and 1L summer, and ideally throughout your entire time in law school. And a big piece of that is self-assessment, right? As Dean Verona was saying, identifying your strengths, your interests. And the only way to do that in a productive way is to really get in there and understand what all is available. What are the practice areas? Oftentimes, law students initially will think that they have a good sense of what antitrust is, or they have a good sense of what a transactional lawyer does. But as Dean Verona was saying, in the homework, doing the research, but also that experiential piece in the internship, in the field placement, is so very important. And many times it reinforces what a student thinks that they're interested in. But just as importantly, sometimes it shows them that maybe that setting, maybe that particular employer is just not a good fit for them longer term as a career choice. And all of those things are really valuable. I would say in terms of evening students and their ability to avail themselves of experiential kind of learning, of having internships and field placements, there's definitely opportunities for those. It's much more challenging. And I think anyone in higher ed will definitely be very honest about that. It's challenging, and it also depends on the nature of their daytime role, right? So we have some who are teachers. We actually, one year we had many teachers, so they naturally have their summers off. So they didn't encounter that usual challenge of how do I find 8 to 10 weeks in the summer to do a legal internship while I'm still manager of a real estate company, or while I'm still a vice president of an insurance entity. So for it really depends on your situation. We have some students who their day job is quite flexible. It's remote. And they're able then to work with a legal employer, such as a judge, who's willing to be flexible as well, maybe with a remote legal internship, or even a hybrid one that with some working out, they're able to make work and along with their day job. So it really depends. And I would say this is kind of a good moment to talk about individualized counseling. And so we really believe and embrace the idea that individualized counseling is the core piece of career development success in law school, especially here at Rutgers. But I would say for evening students, multiply that, 10 times over. It really comes down to a particular situation. We have a lot of evening students who have growing families, young children, lots of different responsibilities and considerations about what would be a good fit for them. So it's one of those situations where something tailor-made in terms of the job search strategy, in terms of connecting them with employers that we know historically are open to maybe an atypical type of schedule. These are all key things in helping to support our evening students.
Yes, and I should add that the evening students do have opportunities to participate in clinics. Some of the clinics are not litigation based, so you do not have to go to court, but you are working with clients on a completely different schedule. There is a clinic in the summer, our entrepreneurship clinic, where you work with people in Newark. And I think the Camden students can participate in this as well, where they work with small business owners, helping them to incorporate, to file papers to become an LLC. Maybe they might need some help with a trademark or licensing question. So it's we try very hard to make sure that as many opportunities are available for the evening class as there are for the day class. But if you really want to go to court during the day, some of our evening students will stay evening for maybe 2 years, 2.5 years, and then say, I'm not going to continue working here after law school. And so they bag the job and they decide that now it's time to go full time, and then they can participate in some of these other activities, excuse me, that are only during the day. Lots of people, let's switch a little bit. Lots of people hear about OCI, on-campus interviews. And I think it's very different than participating in job fairs that they may have done as undergrads. So Becky, you want to talk a little bit about OCI and how all that operates?
Sure. So OCI stands for on-campus interviews. On-campus interviews have been virtual for the last couple of years, and we anticipate that they will likely continue to be virtual because, frankly, the employers find the virtual aspect to be quite convenient, and I think a lot of the students do as well. So here at Rutgers, there's an OCI program in the fall and an OCI program in the spring. The fall program tends to attract primarily large law firms. And the reason for that is large law firms are hiring for a summer position that is almost a year in advance, right? It's the fall and you're applying for a job that would be, the following summer. And not all legal employers can anticipate their need that far in advance. And so at least the very beginning of the fall OCI program, the first session is what we call it, is primarily large law firms in the Philadelphia area, South Jersey, and then of course on the Newark campus, it's the Northern New Jersey firms and the New York firms as well. There's the way that program works is, it's basically focused towards 2L students. So it's not something you'd really have to worry about as a 1L. Most of the employers are interested in hiring 2Ls for summer positions. You would apply if that's something you're interested in. Not everybody is interested in working for a large firm. There are, as we were discussing before, lots of different types of employers and practice settings. The large law firm is just one, narrow subset, but you would apply essentially over the summer, even though we call it fall OCI, and the interviews would take place virtually beginning in August. There's also a second session of OCI in the fall that is more focused on government employers and a handful of smaller law firms. Sometimes the public interest employer is in there as well. And again, those are for summer positions, with the focus being on 2L and sometimes 3L students as well. Some employers are also looking for 3Ls for post-grad positions. And then in the spring semester, we have the spring on-campus interview program. And that program is generally comprised of employers that are like smaller law firms, small and mid-sized law firms, some government agencies, some public interest employers. And again, the reason being, it's all about timing. So these employers, maybe they're only really anticipating their need or able to anticipate their need a few months in advance. And for the spring program, I find that we have more employers that are seeking 3Ls as opposed to in the fall program. And part of the reason for that is large law firms, right? So I talked about how large law firms are the primary participants in that program. They have a very specific way of hiring entry-level associates, and the way that they do that is through their 2L summer associate class. So when they're hiring 2Ls to come work for them for the summer, what they're really doing is they're thinking, okay, so we need to anticipate how many new associates we're going to need the following year. And so at the end of that, that summer program, that summer associate class, the idea is that they would hopefully offer you a position, a post-grad position. So the point is that in general, when we're talking about large law firm hiring, they tend to be kind of married to this structure where they focus on 2Ls, hire them for a summer associate position, and then hire their entry levels out of that 2L summer associate class. And so we don't often see a lot of 3L hiring during fall OCI, at least during that first session when we're focusing primarily on these large firms. So in the spring, when we have a broader variety of employers. It's more of a, 2Ls. Even sometimes we have employers that are also interested in interviewing 1Ls, but we also see 3L hiring there as well. So that's OCI in sort of a nutshell. I mean, I could probably go on for an hour about that, but just to kind of give you like the basic, the broad brushes.
Yeah, thank you. That was really informative. Dean Acevedo, one other thing or one other career path that students take after they graduate are clerkships. They may decide to spend a year or two clerking for a judge. Can you talk a little bit about, I get a lot of students saying, why do so many of our graduates end up clerking? So talk to us a little bit about the clerkship process and what it all means to be able to clerk for a judge.
Absolutely. So if you talk to anyone who has served as a judicial law clerk, and Dean Verona being one of them, they will tell you, right, that it's one of the best experiences they've ever had professionally. And part of that is it's this unique opportunity to basically be a judge's counsel, right? To be their right-hand person, work very closely with them to get this valuable perspective, have that vantage point of seeing litigators before the court, of getting to understand the litigation process really, really well. And in New Jersey, the unique feature of the court system here is that the judiciary developed some time ago positions for new grads, and not every state has that. So New Jersey is very unique in that it offers depending on the calculation, but over 450 opportunities every year for brand new graduates to serve as basically the judge's attorney in those roles in chambers. And so part of the reason why Rutgers and Seton Hall and other area law schools have so many graduates going into judicial clerkships is because the opportunities are plentiful and they're really valuable experiences. So those two things together usually produce a good number of our graduates taking that career path for that first year. Our students also go into federal clerkships as well. Most often that first year after graduation, federal clerkships that they enter would be magistrate clerkships, bankruptcy, district court clerkships in this area tend to be filled by more experienced attorneys. And what I mean by that is sometimes it might just be 1 or 2 years at a law firm before entering a district court clerkship, but that's not, across the board. There are some district court judges who do hire brand new graduates, but the area that we're in geographically, the District of New Jersey, and then our neighboring New York districts, the Southern District of New York and the Eastern District of New York, many of those judges have moved toward a hiring model of looking for people who have had at least a couple of years of experience beforehand. So oftentimes that entry federal clerkship might be with a bankruptcy or magistrate judge for our brand new graduates. But yes, we have graduates going, many of them into the state courts and some into federal clerkships.
Okay, and Beth, there was like a two-part question that was in the chat that I think relates more to us here in Newark, because
Okay.
you're talking about the New York market. So one question was, and some of this also would relate to Becky, how big a role do alumni play in helping with students find work? And also, how do we prepare students to, if they want to go to big law in New York? And I have to say, there is big law in New Jersey also. If you're at some of the big New Jersey firms, you're going to get the same kind of experience that you would in New York. But the student wants to know, like, how do we prepare them for something like that and to figure out whether or not they're going to have an offer in that kind of an area?
So the preparation piece, we'll talk about that, and then the role that alumni play. So just to go back and kind of connect it to things we talked about earlier, from October on, we're working with students as closely and as often as they wish to work with us individually. And then there are a series of core programs that we run just to get them prepared for that summer search and the OCI process beyond that. And that includes workshops having to do with resumes and cover letters, intensive interviewing workshops, a mock interview program that is a large part of its success is the engagement of our wonderful and accomplished alumni. Last year, I believe we engaged over 70 alums in our core programming. And whether that was them coming and talking about how to succeed as a summer associate, how to interview, how to survive OCI, we integrate alumni participation into every facet of our programming. And it is, I think, a really important piece of why our students are successful in that path. When we get engaged in the OCI process, as interviews start being announced and students are invited to meet with firms, we connect students with alums who either work at the firm and aren't going to be interviewed in the serving as interviews, because that would be a conflict, but just who can connect with the students, tell them about their experience, tell them things that the firm would be most interested in, so the student can adjust accordingly in their preparation. We have them talk to students later on once they've gotten the offer, when they're trying to decide if a law firm is the right fit for them. We make sure that they're connected with alumni to figure that part out as well. So alumni play a really big role in that. Going back to what Dean Verona was saying earlier on about what the focus should be, that especially in the first semester of your first year, large law firms are very focused on academic performance. So that is why we can't say it enough that there really isn't much to do before December for a 1L law student in terms of the summer job search, or OCI, which really doesn't get started until the end of the first year. So it's really allowing yourself to focus completely on your academics, on your studies, is really the thing that will help you most when it comes to competing in the on-campus interview process with large firms.
And I should add that at Rutgers, we do not rank students. So you can't add a rank to your resume. You can, if you have a very strong GPA, you can put that GPA there, but you can't say, I'm top 5%, I'm top 10%, I'm top 20%. And so the firms cannot ask us to select out people that they want, it's like they give you a set of criteria. We only want to see people on journals who are in the top 20% of the class. So that's not what happens at Rutgers. Just like we holistically look at every application, the same thing has to happen to the firm. So, but again, I want to emphasize that all of the stars have to be in line if you're really looking to work in what they call big law, a firm like Sullivan and Cromwell or Cadwalader. And strong grades, good grades in your writing classes are incredibly important. The interview process is also very, very important. They want to know that they want to work with you. They see your resume. And if you have work experience before you've come to law school, all of that helps as well. Both offices will help you get your resume down to one page. One page. Everything's got to be succinct. Nobody's going to be flipping through 5 pages of a resume. So even if you have extensive work experience, they're going to help you get that down to one page. One other quick question, Becky, was about if you do a clerkship, how do you then transition to working in a firm? Like, how does that happen? I know we don't track students afterwards, after they've graduated. We have a lot of other things that have to happen, but students who have clerked in a firm, how do they then end up, clerked for a judge, how do they then end up in a firm, if they do?
Yeah. So students who clerk end up in, various different settings. So it could be a firm, it could be a government agency, it could be public interest. We don't systemically track, but because we do have a strong alumni network, we have a good sense about where our grads who are clerking go after they've completed their clerkship. And so first, what I would say is that because we have so many judicial clerkship opportunities in New Jersey, we also have a significant portion of attorneys who have done a clerkship and recognize the value in it. And so often what we'll see when, when a firm or a government agency or even a public interest organization is looking to fill a position, we'll often see prefer candidates with a judicial clerkship. So the credential itself is is part of what will get you to that next step. And in fact, there are certain law firms that will only hire people who have clerked. I know we have them in South Jersey. I'm sure you have them in North Jersey. But in terms of process and getting you to that next step. So we have in the office an alumni counselor. So we have a counselor who is specifically dedicated to working with our alumni. Once you graduate from Rutgers Law, you still have lifetime access to our services. So whether it's working with specifically with our alumni counselor who works across both campuses, or it could even be working with the person who you worked with while you were a law student. Dean Acevedo and I still work with alumni. Our wonderful alumni counselor handles sort of the overflow, so to speak. But we're here to continue to support you in that process. The way that you get there is it's similar to the way that you will have gotten your clerkship, right? So it's being diligent in your job search, going through that self-assessment process, being very thoughtful about asking for help when you need it, right? That's a very big part of this process. So there's no requirement when you're in law school that you meet with your counselor. I take that back. We do require that you meet with us at least once during your 1L year. And there will be some other certain points where we'll say you must meet with us. But doing so is really up to you, right? And so it will help you to be self-directed in that respect, right? To know when to ask for help and then to come to us when you need us. And as I mentioned, we are available to our alumni forever. So, so the way you get that job is you start out by working with us, working with either the alumni counselor or the counselor you were assigned to when you were a law student.
Thank you. There was a question in the chat about if they pursue an unpaid externship during the summer after 1L, is there ways that they can find funding? And the answer is yes. The Public Interest Law Fund raises money every year to provide stipends for students who are doing public interest work or might be clerking in the summer. If you are interested in getting credit as opposed to being paid for a judicial clerkship in the summer, you have to speak with the head of experiential learning, Dean Rosner here in Newark, and Jill Friedman in Camden, and they can work out with you how you can use that summer internship to get credit. You have to take a course in the fall, and that will all work out on credit. But there's lots and lots of different ways that you can get funding, and so we try as best we can to help you, and provide some funds so that you're not starving during the summer. That's not what we want you to do. Okay. Any other questions coming up in the chat or in the Q&A? I want to add that not a week goes by that there isn't 3 or 4 programs that are listed for students on the Newark campus, and certainly in Camden as well, on all kinds of things, whether it's the DA's office coming in to talk about careers there, people in intellectual property doing, having a conversation about careers. It's amazing how many things are available for you to educate yourself about what it's like when when you start to figure out exactly what's going to work for you. I get many students who send in essays and I want to do this with my law degree, and they've got this path already planned out for them. And then they get to school and they realize that, oh, that's really not what I want to do. And now they're all, what do I do and how do I figure it out? And that's where Dean Acevedo and Dean Verona's office come into play, and the wonderful counselors that they both have in their offices. Dean Acevedo also has some students that are third-year students that can help you on a whole variety of different issues. We really and truly want to make sure that every single student has an opportunity to make some plans while they're in school and not just show up when they're a 3L. That's really late to show up. But I think that by and large, you're going to find a very supportive, very helpful staff who can help you if you think you want to go into the corporate area, help you figure out what courses you need to take, because you can't just take all corporate courses. You also need to look at evidence and criminal procedure and lots of other courses that are important for you to get a well-rounded education. So we really do work very hard to make sure that you are informed, that you don't feel like you're doing this by yourself. And it's complicated. I think it's much more complicated than anyone who was an undergrad or even in graduate school trying to find, working with their career development office and trying to find a job post-graduation. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Wait, one more in the Q&A. Let's see. How easy is it to find your own internship opportunities or secure an internship with companies, organizations that don't have a connection with Rutgers Law? Beth, you want to answer that? I mean, I think that's, the onus is on them.
Well, so let me say this. We post thousands and thousands of opportunities throughout the year, right, at both campuses. And no matter which campus you're at, you have access to the job boards, the electronic job boards at the other campus. So it's double, right, the opportunity, double the markets that you would at most law schools. And so most of those opportunities don't necessarily have a Rutgers connection. These are just companies and entities and law firms who want to recruit and hire Rutgers students. So there, you don't have to necessarily look at it like, well, I'll have to kind of target employers who only have Rutgers alumni. That's one path and one method, but there are many employers who welcome applications from Rutgers students on a weekly, monthly, annual basis. And so many of those are in our job boards. One of the things that I always say to 1L students is you want to make our electronic job board your first stop, because these are the jobs where employers took that extra step to register, to sign up, to send a job description in, right? Because they're interested in Rutgers students. So it's very different than a general job board, than monster.com, than Idealist or Indeed, where employers are putting it up for everyone who is in that very large pool of applicants to apply. These are employers who are targeting Rutgers students. So, and many of them are not necessarily connected to Rutgers in the way that the student might be envisioning.
Great, thank you. We're getting close to the end of our time. So Dean Verona, any final words of advice or anything that you'd like to leave our students with?
So I would just say, as you approach your legal education and what you in your career path, have an open mind. There are so many practice areas that you might not even heard of. There are practice areas that maybe you've heard of, and you might initially think, oh, I don't want to do that. That sounds boring, that uninteresting, whatever. Have an open mind. You might be surprised what is interesting to you. And look, you might try something and decide that it's not for you, and that's okay. That's important information. The self-assessment aspect that Dean Acevedo mentioned, I think that it's critical, and it's something that you should continually do, right? I mean, you should do it, 10, 15, you continually do it like throughout your entire career, but certainly as a law student, you should always be, I recommend that you should always be checking in and thinking about, what do you like? What don't you like? What are you good at? What's a challenge for you? And trying new things, because while you're in law school, it is a unique opportunity to try new things, and the likelihood that you would be pigeonholed, because that is something that I think every law student is worried about, is I mean, unless you had a previous career doing something, it's very unlikely that a summer internship is going to limit your future options. It's just, we just don't really, see that so much. So try things, and have an open mind and continually check in, and continue that self-assessment process throughout law school and throughout your entire legal career.
Dean Acevedo, you're up next. You get the last word, or maybe I do, but go ahead.
So I would just build off of what Dean Verona said to add, we're here to meet you. Should you decide to come to Rutgers Law School, we're here to meet you where you are. And what I mean by that is, if you have a very specific sense of what you think you want to do, we're here to support that. Also to remind you to keep your part of your mind open to exploring other things. And we offer a lot of things for you to be able to pursue that with. But also too, if you're like the vast majority of 1L students who come and say, I really don't know. I knew law school was for me because, it really spoke to my strengths of research and writing. And I find the law super interesting and exciting, but I don't know yet what I want to do in terms of a practice area or a career path. And we'll be here to help you if that's how you identify as well. And so whether it's very early on, we have our students who show up the very first available day in October. And then there are some students who want to focus on school and maybe don't see us till a little bit later in that second semester, or even a little bit later. As Dean Walton said, we don't want you to wait too long, but if you happen to, for whatever reason, we are here to help you at any point. And so I always say to students, after we do the initial appointment, where we really talk a lot about what brought them to law school, their long-term hopes and dreams, I say, this is just a start. If you forgot to ask me anything, we forgot to talk about anything, this is a process, and I'm going to be with you from this point till you graduate and beyond. Dean Verona and I, even though we do have someone who does some of our alumni counseling, both of us have counseled people 5, 10, 20 years out of law school, helping them make transitions and apply to other things. Career development is a lifelong pursuit. So we hope to see you in the fall. And like I said, we're ready to meet you wherever you are when you arrive.
Great, thank you so much. If you have any questions that you may not have had answered or that you didn't have a chance to put in the chat or the Q&A, you can send it to us at admissions@law.rutgers.edu, and we'll be happy to help you with a variety of whatever kinds of questions might have come up after watching this webinar. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful week. So long.